One. This is the Fresh Start Project, where we explore the growing loss of trust in social institutions and how we can break free from broken systems and move forward towards something better. I'm Christian Mislowick, and my guest today is Dr. Shea Bradley-Farrell. Shea is a foreign policy and national security consultant and president of the Counterpoint Institute for Policy, Research, and Education. She recently served as a professor for the Defense Security Cooperation University of the Department of Defense. She served as the vice president of international affairs for Concerned Women for America during the Trump administration. During this time, she's worked directly with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and senior advisor Ivanka Trump. Shea is a frequent guest on One America News, and her op-eds are regularly published in National Review, The Washington Times, The European Conservative, Daily Caller, The Hill, The Washington Examiner, and The Federalist. Shea, thank you for joining me today.
Hey, Christian, I'm so glad to be on. Like we were saying a little while ago, you and I have been working together for a few years now, but we've only talked via email or on the phone. So finally, face-to-face conversation is great. Absolutely.
Getting to match the voice to the face, although I've been watching plenty of your YouTube interviews and seeing you on OAN. So it's good to speak with you in person. But first, I want to learn a little bit about the history of the Counterpoint Institute. So what was your inspiration for establishing this organization? What inspired you?
Well, a lot of reasons, but I'd worked for a great organization, Concerned Women for America. I had worked as a contractor on our security cooperation workforce for the Department of Defense, like you said, the Defense Security Cooperation University. But I just felt like I could pinpoint where the real problems were if I did my own thing. So almost 2 years ago now, I started Counterpoint Institute. It's a 501c3. It is a conservative organization. It's a think tank, yes, but we're also an activist organization. This is, one of the reasons I started is because I could put boots on the ground, so to speak. You and I have worked together on border investigations. You edited a lot of my op-eds for the Daily Signal previously. I can go down there. We go down there and actually find out what's happening on the border. I've spent probably total maybe 5-6 weeks down in Arizona, Texas, New Mexico, California, on the border, finding out what was going on, and then coming back to Capitol Hill to help change public policy because of it. There are a lot of people in DC that just sit and think great thoughts, and I'm not down on that. I'm an academic. I believe in that. But we feel at Counterpoint Institute that it's really important to go see what's happening. Last year, we were in a Ukrainian refugee center on the border, Hungary. Hungary is on the border of Ukraine. So we went there to find out actually what was happening. And those are just two examples. So I'm able to do that now that I'm on my own. The other thing is, it is really hard to find conservatives who are working in the foreign policy field. You'll find a lot of Republicans working in the foreign policy field. A lot of them are the neocons, the war hawks, et cetera, et cetera. It's hard to find conservatives that are working not just on national security issues like the border, foreign policy like Ukraine, but also on social issues internationally. I work on foreign aid issues. For example, a lot of your listeners probably don't know that they're paying for abortions overseas through Mexico City policy. Biden put it back into place after Trump left. And, whatever side you are on, pro-choice, pro-life, whatever, Americans, like 80-something% overwhelmingly agree that we don't want to pay for abortion overseas. You're also paying for transgender promotion of ideology overseas through our State Department. I look at the foreign aid going to Ukraine, and there was such a lack of accountability on it for a long time. So our institute is really sort of a holistic look at foreign policy. And here's the main thing. We're interested in America first. How does it affect America?
Yeah.
We want good relations with countries. We want to have a humanitarian face, to continue to be the greatest humanitarian country in the world. But we believe in America first. How is all of those issues, how are all of those issues affecting America? So I felt like there was a big hole where conservatives were not filling that need. And so that's really what we're trying to do.
Why do you think that there's so few conservatives working in foreign policy?
Good question.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of people don't know the issues. A lot of people aren't international minded. I spend a lot of time trying to make people understand, Americans understand, how important it is for them to know what's going on around the world. It affects America directly, and there is a disconnect in Americans with that. If you go to Europe, generally you'll find people there, kind of off the streets, that will want to talk to you about our foreign policy and what's going on over here. They know what's going on over here, but we don't know what's going on over there.
Yep.
Because we have a sense, we've had such a great country. We have a sense of security and well-being and prosperity, and that other things aren't going to affect us. But it's not true. I think Ukraine is an example of that, and we can talk about that if you want, but I believe that we're walking ourselves up to a greater conflict. But, I was mentioning like the transgender promotion. I came to DC it's been 7 years ago now. Obama was in office, and he was actually already promoting the transgender policies in our schools, that led to biological guys being able to compete on women's sports team, boys and girls, blah, blah, blah. Well, the European Union was promoting that kind of stuff years before we were doing it here. And this is just an example. That kind of ideology filters through the United Nations, from the EU to the United Nations and other organizations. Like the World Health Organization is one of the biggest pro-abortion organizations in the world. So if you're not watching what's going on around the world and how our foreign policy is relating to it, what are we funding? Are we funding these organizations? Then eventually your child, out in Wisconsin in their school is going to be affected by whatever is going on in Europe and around the world. So that's just a small example, but I try to make people understand that. And I think conservatives, they're very locked onto family and life issues, and that's great within our own country.
Yeah.
But I think that is short-sighted.
Right. Yeah, there is a lot of interest in the domestic issues, but a lot of those domestic issues were coming from outside of the United States. Like you said, it seems Obama was just behind on the curve in implementing this leftist project here in America that was already in full swing in Europe.
That's right.
Yeah. And you mentioned the World Health Organization, the EU. This was described to me, the difference between an international organization and a supranational organization. I might be getting the terms wrong, but NATO, it's a partnership of different organizations, but there's no they're not necessarily establishing policies that individual countries have to adhere to. I'm not sure if I have that correct. Whereas the EU, it is electing bureaucrats that do have direct control over how the constituent countries operate or how they're governed. And it's not anything that the average people in those countries are necessarily electing. So that's one of the ways that this globalist project is implemented without the consent of the people directly affected to it. And it seems to be coming here to the US.
You kind of hit the nail on the head as far as the EU goes.
Yeah.
What we are experiencing in America as conservatives, the pushback we're getting back from the deep state, from the liberal leftist media, liberal leftist academia, being canceled, basically being told we no longer can speak what we believe. We can't believe in family life, national sovereignty like this, or you're going to get canceled. The EU is doing that to its member states. It has a very top-down decision-making process, which is what you were talking about. They're trying to put the decision-making of the member states They're each states, their own countries, they have their own sovereignty, but they're trying to take that decision making away from the member states and put it up at the EU level.
Mm-hmm.
And there are countries that give a lot of pushback. Hungary is one of them. I've been to Hungary a couple of times, and I spoke at CPAC Hungary last year, which was very interesting, the first European CPAC. But it's a very similar situation. They're pushing, the transgender curriculum. EU is into the member states' curriculum, and Hungary, for example, did a referendum and let their citizens vote on this, and they said, no, we don't want this.
Mm-hmm.
So in response to that, the EU slapped sanctions on Hungary, so they don't get money that they were supposed to get. And probably, maybe worse is the fact that they really malign Hungary. Sometimes it's been Poland and a couple other countries, but they'll malign that country in the press, in politics. And over here in our country, I get this question all the time. Oh, Hungarian is authoritarian. They love Russia. They love Putin. I'm like, no.
Yeah.
This is a false, fake media attack. Oh no, that can't be true. And a lot of times this is conservatives talking to me, and I'm like, well, what does the media over here say about you? Is it true? Are you a deplorable? Do you hate African Americans? Do you hate homosexual people? Because this is what's being said about you. Is it true? Well, no. Okay. Well, then you could kind of imagine that it could happen in a similar situation to Hungary and some of these other countries.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a really direct parallel. And I've tried also to bring people into understanding international affairs to help them understand that.
Right. It kind of goes back. It goes back to the seemingly lack of interest about foreign affairs, that if a conservative is falling prey to that type of that psyop, that fake news about Hungary being this authoritarian pro-Putin nation, and this is conservatives saying that, then it seems like there's some educational gaps here, even among conservative Americans, that need to be addressed. So it's good that your organization is trying to address that.
Trying to do that, yeah, because one thing, Christian, is I think that as conservatives, we fight false narratives, and the false narratives they have the loudest voice in the country right now, because the narratives are owned by the media and by academia. The narrative right now in politics is owned by the Biden administration. And people believe what they hear. It's so I look at it as a very patient undertaking, because I really get frustrated to try to explain to people, please stop thinking so surfacey. Could you go a couple levels below the issue and look at really what's happening? Mm-hmm. Anyway.
Good. We already covered a lot of ground. I really want to go deeper into Ukraine, Hungary, the global state of conservatism. Let's start with Ukraine, because I know you've been talking a lot about the U.S. response to Ukraine. You recently wrote an op-ed for the Washington Times. This ran in September. Now, this was titled "Time to Negotiate Peace Between the Ukraine and Russia." And you make the argument that the West's response to the Russian invasion has been a disaster. I kind of see this op-ed as making 4 main points, and let me just summarize it, and correct me if I'm wrong about any of this. 1, the sanctions have provoked Russia to withhold natural gas from Europe. 2, this has caused a global energy crisis, leading to energy price spikes. It's devastating to European nations. 3, Russia has benefited from this energy crisis. Its state-owned energy company, Gazprom, is reaping record high profits because of the increasing prices of fuel. And then lastly, 4, the sanctions have also pushed Russia into a closer partnership with China. And China is enjoying 50% discounts on Russian natural gas. So it's another adversarial nation, adversarial to the US, that's benefiting from a prolonged war. So all of these are reasons why you call on the U.S. to negotiate a peace treaty with Russia. These seem like compelling reasons to me. So I guess my first question is, how much hope do you have that President Biden will try to initiate some sort of peace talk with Putin?
Wow, what a question. Right now, I don't have any hope that he will, but it's sort of the point of why I'm pushing for this, because the way people are thinking about this has to change. My organization, Counterpoint Institute, in December, we put out an open letter to some of the leaders in the country, the organizations in the country, that we wrote calling for ceasefire and peace negotiations. We got 8 signatures on this letter, and I will say that they are very influential signatures, but I have not released the letter because I don't think 8 is enough. And what happened is, I went to the highest echelons, I guess, of conservative leadership with this letter, and I was listened to, but there is too great of a divide on this issue. But what I believe is that in large part it's because people don't understand the issue. It has been coined as a fight against authoritarianism and democracy. It is not. And this is not why I don't think, we should continue sending military weapons to Ukraine. But Ukraine is not a democracy. Its government is second to Russia only in corruption. It has a 2.5 rating out of 7 in its from Freedom House organization, from freedomhouse.org, on its government accountability and transparency. Zelensky has outlawed his political opposition. He has nationalized TV media there. He's closed Russian Orthodox churches. You've seen that, Christian churches. So let me pause right here for a moment and say, so I do hear sometimes conservatives saying, oh, this is their, Ukraine's 1776 moment. Baloney. It's not. I think the Ukrainian citizens are extremely brave, and I applaud them for trying to keep their country. I believe in their sovereignty, but their government is a corrupt government as all get out. So this is not a fight between authoritarianism and democracy, number one. And now I've got off my train of thought because I got a little upset about that, Christian. Where was I?
The possibility of negotiating peace, but I think we've kind of stumbled upon a more interesting topic, the schism within the right about attitudes towards how to resolve this. It seems like there's a neocon argument there. Well, they're using this kind of smokescreen that this is the 1776 moment for Ukraine fighting for its sovereignty.
And what I was going to say is, so I put this open letter, out there, tried to get enough signatories. I've put it on the back burner for a while. But what I found was that our people, even leaders, do not understand the issue. That, like I said, it's been coined very simply: authoritarianism versus democracy, or just because they're corrupt, it doesn't mean we shouldn't support them. Well, that's not the issue. The issue is all those things you just mentioned in my article. We're driving our adversaries together. China is gaining in economic strength from its relationship with Russia since we put sanctions on them. And what happened, Christian? Let me explain, because people don't always understand. We put sanctions on Russia, and Putin said, oh yeah, well, I'm going to reduce the amount of natural gas that I'm sending to Europe. And actually, he started doing this like months before the war. So I really think it was foreshadowing of what he was going to do, of what he was planning. He started reducing the amount of natural gas going to Europe, and Europe is absolutely reliant on Russian natural gas and Russian oil. The pipelines, a lot of them are Russian built, right? But so what happened is, I guess it was around June, July, August this year, the amount of natural gas that he had reduced going into Europe was 90% of what he was supplying them. So they were already in an energy crisis of sorts before. What happened is this caused their natural gas prices in Europe to skyrocket. And I have a lot of friends and in Europe or that have told me, they're trying to support their families. They're having a really rough time with it.
Yeah.
It's caused some people to lose jobs. They've moved to different countries. Industries have shut down in Italy, in Germany, and, all over Europe. I don't think Americans understand exactly what's going on. And Europe is our greatest ally, all of it, right? And we're weakening our allies as we are pushing Russia into the arms of China.
Yeah.
So, like you said, Gazprom, which was the Russia state-owned energy giant, made record profits last year because of this. China was able to buy natural gas from Russia at a 50% discount. China has also become the #1 importer of Russian oil, overtook the EU. The EU was that. So it is strengthening these relationships that we don't want strengthened. And it's Russia and China also signed like a $80 billion 10-year oil and gas deal last year. So there are a lot of things going on, and the situation is much more complex than people are realizing. And I'll pause there, but the other aspect of it, and I can probably tell you a lot of things that your listeners most likely are not aware of, is that we are enabling this ongoing war, not just crushing the Ukrainians and their country, but I believe we're pulling us, NATO, and the United States into a much broader conflict.
Yeah. It sounds like China's really sitting pretty. I was researching this a little bit earlier around November. The reason why Gulf countries like Qatar can't supply Europe, make up this supply problem in fuels, because they're locked into contracts with China already that are multi-year contracts. So they seem to be the winner from all this, quietly letting things play out. And then, as you said, this conflict that's being that's coming to a head, this NATO versus Russia. Tell me a little bit about that. I mean, we know that some European countries already sent tanks to Ukraine. There's sending a lot of military support. I just saw that the White House signed off on a $2.2 billion aid package to Ukraine. I don't want to disparage this position by continuously calling it neocon, but it does seem like the mainstream conservative argument for pushing against Putin. I do understand the fact that we don't want Russia to think that it can get away with making these land grabs with impunity. I do, however, understand the points you are making. So maybe we can dive into that a little bit. Okay.
I mean, that's a really good question. I'll tell you how I view it.
Yeah.
First of all, we should have started way before the war started with some sort of deterrence for Putin. Biden is a very weak administration. His administration is very weak.
Would Putin have made this land grab if Trump was president?
Of course not. He didn't even put troops around the border, did he, during Trump's presidency? Yeah. But he took Crimea during Obama, and he has invaded Ukraine during Biden's administration. And if you think about the Obama's presidency, I don't know if you remember, there was a time in 2012 where he was talking to, I always say his name wrong, Medvedev, who was at that time, I can't remember exactly what he was at that time. He used to go back and forth between being prime minister and president with Putin, but I don't remember exactly. But Obama said to him, please tell your boss or tell Putin to just give me some space until I'm reelected, and then I can help you get whatever you want, is basically what the conversation was, which just shows weakness in our own foreign policy. So, of course, Crimea was taken by the Russians during that time. I believe that, Putin was scared of Trump. I think that Trump's and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, they put up, a model of deterrence. It's called in foreign policy where bad actors are afraid of what you might do to them if they step over the line. Biden, what he did basically was to show that we abandoned our allies in Afghanistan. China certainly was emboldened by that move. And then, Putin certainly has been. We've got this China spy balloon over us right now. And what does the Secretary of State say? He says that he called them and said, hey, it's very irresponsible to do this. It's a spy balloon collecting information over our facilities that have nuclear weapons. You think that's just irresponsible? So we look pretty stupid. Mm-hmm. So we should have started a long time ago, I think, on this, as far as Putin goes. But a lot of people, their argument about continuing to supply weapons to Ukraine is because we don't want Putin to continue to come west. I don't believe he will. There are a lot of experts in Europe and in European governments, actually, that don't believe that he will either. So this is the way I tell people to think about it. NATO has military that we put up against the Russian border, and they do military exercises on his border. We as a government have been continuing to make different kind of security agreements with Ukraine, and then Ukraine comes out saying that it wants to be part of NATO. I think Putin was panicking. If you think about it, it's like, can you imagine there being Russian military exercises along the Mexican border here in the United States, in our southern border? It's not an excuse, but I'm just trying to express what I think he was thinking strategically, that, hey, I got to move to push this back. I think, and actually the foreign minister of Hungary, I interviewed him back in October for a Capitol Hill event. He said the same thing. He does not believe that Putin has the courage to come against NATO in that way and to continue moving west. Mm-hmm. So I think that's what his thinking is. That doesn't mean that he should have invaded Ukraine. I do not believe what he's doing is right. But when you walk out all the problems with it and how we are escalating towards a much broader conflict, how we are giving $110 billion, increasing the lethality of weapons that we're giving, that package you just talked about will enable the Ukrainians to double the range of the missiles that they've been sending every month, basically. We do something that we said we wouldn't do. Last week or week before, we promised to give these M1 Abrams tanks to Ukraine. In April, Biden said, oh, we wouldn't do that because that would start World War III. So now we're sending these tanks that Biden said would start World War III. So every month we do more and more and more. There was an article out yesterday, I believe, with Putin saying, that this would just, us giving these longer range missiles would just provoke more strikes from the Russians into Ukraine. Mm-hmm. And let me tell you, I want to say this too. I think it will make what I'm saying kind of drive home, Christian, and then I'll shut up a minute. But in February, the U.S. military put us on DEFCON 3, military alert readiness. Mm-hmm. At least up until about a month or two ago, we were still there. I haven't checked to see if we are. I would imagine so. That is the first time we've been at that alert since 9/11. So that kind of gives you some sort of understanding of what's going on. And that's because the Russians feel that we are pressing and pushing them with the increased everything that we do to give Ukraine weapons, etc. In August, the 101st Airborne Division, which is an elite army division, deployed to Romania and have been doing military exercises along the Ukraine border, going on news, the commanders, and saying, we are ready to go into Ukraine at any minute, and fight the Russians. All these sorts of stances of, we are going to pursue more war. And I just think we are constantly provoking and provoking. And that was the first time in 80 years that army division had ever has been to Europe for something like that. So just trying to put this in perspective and make Americans understand that there's a lot of things going out there that are moving us closer and closer to some sort of conflict, and bringing us not just in a proxy war situation, which I believe is what we're doing, but in a more serious potential conflict.
You were recently in Hungary. You've spoken to people close to the situation. What is your personal assessment of the situation? How do you think this plays out?
Do you mean what will happen?
How do you think this will be resolved?
Well, I'll tell you, I'm concerned because of the administration that we have in office right now. Mm-hmm. I believe if Trump were back in office for about 5 minutes, that we would get somewhere with this, with a good resolution. Yeah. I'm concerned. I'm really concerned. I can't say how it's going to play out. I can tell you what I'm warning about, and people, I believe, that understand everything that's going on, like we just talked about, the weakening of Europe, the strengthening of China, the fact that our elite division is over in Romania practicing on the Ukraine border, all of these different things. If you understand all of these things, it paints a picture towards broader conflict, perhaps nuclear conflict. Because also in war, Christian, I am not a military expert, but I certainly have worked on the fringes of it for a long time. Grew up in the military, not that makes me an expert on military bases, but I really think that we are provoking a situation where we need to be promoting peace, not just for our own sakes, but for the Ukrainian sakes. If you know anything about history, Russia just ground on until Chechnya looked like this lunar landscape. They don't stop. So Zelensky's been very open in saying, we can't defeat Russia unless you guys continue to give us more and more equipment, whatever it is, XYZ at the time. Mm-hmm. So it depends on us. That's people say to me, well, you can't force Zelensky to negotiate peace. No, I can't. Why is he forcing us to give him $110 billion military equipment that we need, that we're being depleted of? We're, 40-year record inflation. Trump could not get them to give him $5 billion, to secure our own border. And we have mass influx of illegal immigration right now. Fentanyl killing our people. It's at a record high right now because it's coming across that border, mixed in with drugs that people don't know it's in. Mm-hmm. We have a serious national security problem at our border, but we're going to give 110 over in Ukraine, where we have very little national interest. I do care about the Ukrainian people. I just think when it comes to policy matters, it's America first. You have to be smart. Like you said, I was in the Ukrainian refugee center in Hungary, and Hungary has had like 1.5 million refugees come through their country, some of whom have stayed, many of whom they have given plane, bus, train tickets to, and let them go to relatives and outside other member states. This refugee center was amazing. It had a daycare center. It had, hundreds of cots where people could sleep. It had food. It even had this little station, and I'm a big dog person, but it had this little station that was set up for dog and cat care. And veterinary care. It was amazing what they have done for the Ukrainian people. Yeah. And I want to make that point because Hungary has also got a lot of backlash years before for not allowing just mass immigration during the Arab Spring to come through their country. And they're like, whoa, hold on, whoa, which is what's happening at our border. And they said no to the EU. They're like, we're a sovereign country. We don't have to allow this. So people have said, well, why are they allowing all these refugees in? the foreign minister said during our interview, because it's war, because they need our help, because these are our, brothers and sisters across the way. There's like 150,000 ethnic Hungarians also in Ukraine.
Mhm.
So anyway, that's another side of the story.
Yes, a very multifaceted story. In fact, another issue I want to get into is the cultural aspect here at home regarding this response to how the US should respond to Ukraine, because I see within the conservative movement, like you said, there's a lot of people who are against Putin, want to push back at him by any means necessary. Perhaps that's the majority if you could only get 8 signatures from the upper echelon of the conservative movement. But then there's also the America First folks like J.D. Vance, Senator Vance. He's been very outspoken about being non-interventionalist, focusing more on spending the money that we've been giving to Ukraine, keeping it more at home. But I also see there's even another layer to all this, and I see this more among younger, perhaps more underground or dissident right-wing circles. I don't like this word dissident, but there's this growing population of people on the right who, and they're not necessarily American, but many of them are. They don't necessarily approve of the invasion. They feel sorry for the Ukrainian people, but they distrust Zelensky. They distrust NATO and the EU. They see them both as vectors of this international leftism. They see Putin as someone who at least is outside of that leftist elitist circle. He's not necessarily the villain that they've been taught to see him as. What do you think about this growing sentiment?
Well, I agree with most of it. I do think Putin is a villain. I think he's evil. That still doesn't, I don't excuse what he's doing. It just, the opposite end of it is I don't believe that our response is putting Americans first. But I agree with, I don't trust Zelensky. I don't trust the EU. The invasion, yes, I very much condemn. Hungary, I wanted to say that earlier, also condemns the invasion. Yeah. I'm not for this at all. And I forget what the other thing was that you said. So yeah, I agree with that mainly. The thing with Putin, I know this has come up, this is sort of a sore subject. Again, I think he's evil. Yeah. But, most of Russia is this Russian Orthodox Christianity, and they believe in a lot of the same traditional values that Americans believe in. So this is another thing that really, I think, is an embarrassment to our country. He's basically laughed at us, as have other countries, because of our obsession with identity politics, with the obsession I believe that the liberal left has in criticizing this great country. Doesn't mean I think everything in this country is right, or, just like with an individual, people in your family. Nobody's perfect, but this is a darn great country. And it's why these people have the freedom to express these opinions. But I think he laughs at us because the liberal left voice really condemning our country, saying that it's a racist country. I do not believe it is a racist country. We have racism for sure. And also our obsession, like I said, with this identity politics, that you must define yourself by your sexuality. You must. Everybody must know my sexuality, or it's an offense. And if a lot of these policies that the Democrats have put forth, or potential legislation, will even, penalize you, will say that you are discriminating if you assume somebody has a different sexual identity than what you see on the outside. It's an obsession. And, Putin has laughed at us about all this, and he's right about that. Doesn't mean I don't think he's a monster. But on that note, I think he's right.
Right.
We're silly.
So this idea that the EU is a vector for this international leftist movement, what about NATO? What is your sense on that?
What about NATO, did you say?
Yeah, do you think it's as compromised or as corrupt an organization as, let's say, the EU?
Hmm. I'm not sure, Christian. I'm not really sure how to answer that. Um, NATO is full of member states that are liberal left. That's why the EU is the way that it is. One thing that I've been saying recently is, you were talking earlier about conservatism growing in the EU. This is a really good thing. This is another reason why conservative Americans should be watching what's going on in Europe. Because if conservatism is growing in Europe, in EU, that means NATO will handle things more conservatively. For example, this could be kind of far-reaching, I don't know. But I think we would have had a different response in NATO if there were more conservative states, a different response to Ukraine. Mm-hmm. We were talking about Trump. Generally, conservative governments are more of a deterrence to bad actors. We're talking about Obama versus Trump, Biden versus Trump, for example. So probably we would have a different response from NATO if that were the case. And I think, part of what our mission is to continue to solidify those relationships with other conservatives around the world. I have some friends in Italy from another think tank that's a conservative think tank. I think it's Center for Machiavelli. It's a really good. There's a think tank in Hungary. It's called Center for Fundamental Rights. They're the ones that were sort of behind bringing CPAC Hungary over there to Hungary. So I think, anyway, conservatism is growing, and this is good for America, and we need to foster that so that these organizations you're talking about will make better decisions, I hope, in the future.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about your Hungary visit. You were there for CPAC. Was it the same trip that you also visited the refugee camp?
Yeah, that was. I've been in Hungary twice. I went and talked at a demographics summit in Budapest in 2019 because they're one of the countries in Europe whose population has been declining. So they put family policies into place that would encourage marriage, that would encourage having babies, and it's working. The population is growing. Abortion is actually down. More people are getting married. So what they did is, and I don't remember the exact numbers, but they put subsidies in place for families that, for people who were married, people who had one child. I think it's, if you have 3 or 4 children, you don't pay any sort of income tax at all. I could be a little bit off on that, but it's these kind of things. And so people are like, oh, wow, I want to get married. You're finding out that people actually want to have more children and want to get married if they're supported in that. So anyway, that was my first trip. But CPAC was last year in May 2022. And there's going to be another one this year. I'll be speaking at that as well. But I'm sorry I interrupted you. You were going to ask me something about my trip last year.
Yes.
The refugee center? Or...
Yeah, I mean, tell me a little bit about the refugee center, or even speaking at CPAC Hungary. I know you interviewed the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Trade of Hungary, Peter Szijjártó. Tell me a little bit about speaking with him and learning from what he had to say.
Well, I actually interviewed him in October in DC.
Oh, okay.
I put on an event at Capitol Hill in partnership with CPI, Conservative Partnership Institute. So my organization, Counterpoint Institute, and CPI, we did a joint event at their facility in DC. The minister came, I interviewed him, he spoke a little bit, and we talked about a lot of different things. We talked a lot about what you and I are talking about, their view on what's happening in Ukraine, and his view on what's going on in Ukraine, and the Prime Minister, Viktor Orban of Hungary, their view is very similar to my view. And they have a lot at stake. They share a border with Ukraine, as I said. they have been paying more and more for energy as their natural gas supply has been cut off or cut way down. They have had a hard time where they stood up against the EU and said, we cannot support these sanctions because it will crush our economy.
Right.
And like I said, the EU also has, put sanctions on them, gave them a hard time, finally relinquished, and then other countries kind of followed Hungary on that. So that interview was very, very good. I think that they're also concerned with nuclear war. They have offered to have peace negotiations there in Budapest. My husband, Chris Farrell, also wrote another op-ed called "It's Time to Meet in Budapest." I think it was in the Washington Times too. But it details a little more of what they would like to see happen in that. Both parties come and then help negotiate peace, of course, with the U.S. at the leadership of it. So that was a great interview. CPAC Hungary was fantastic. I would say that I was very surprised at the number of people from all over Europe that came that are conservative in different ways. And what I thought was really cool is we didn't always agree on everything. And guess what? It was like it used to be in America, where we could talk about things and didn't have to agree without being called haters or, Russia lovers or whatever it is.
Yeah.
It was really cool. I also spoke at a Heritage Foundation and IRI event the day after CPAC. And there were other scholars who were speaking from all kinds of different countries. And it's really good. It's very encouraging to get together and find out that there's more people all over the world kind of facing the situations that we're facing as conservatives, but joining together to strengthen, as CPAC, the theme was last year, strengthen God, family, and homeland. So there's people all over the world that believe in that and want to support each other.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you have your finger to the pulse of global conservatism, or at least rather globalism would kind of imply, that's probably the wrong word. It would imply some sort of supra organization, but different conservative movements across the world. In Europe, maybe perhaps elsewhere, you encountered some folks. What do you think is the state of conservatism around the world?
Well, I guess basically what we've said, I think it's growing.
It is, yeah.
More and more people aren't afraid to go against the EU, go against the deep state or Biden administration here in America or the liberal media. I think more and more people that stand up, and you look and you see there's other people like you have courage to stand up and say, hey, you know what? I really believe family is important. I really believe our national sovereignty is important. I really believe that having 2 million or more illegal people come into our country cuts away our national sovereignty. We believe, people being I guess having the courage to stand up for their own country. I mean, Zelensky is Ukraine first, right? Why aren't we America first? It's just the strangest thing to me. So I have a very positive viewpoint towards conservatism around the world. I believe it's growing, and part of the reason is because we're being pushed to the wall with stupidity. Yeah. I have worked at the UN as a nonprofit organization, but worked on some of the issues there. The UN is pushing lots of what I would call Marxist ideology, definitely non-family values. They push abortion, they push the transgender thing. And I think that in some ways they've really gone too far. We have a lot of work to do, but I believe that people are pushing back. And that's kind of what we saw when Trump was elected, I believe, around the world. Viktor Orban in Hungary being reelected. We've seen a conservative party member be elected here in Italy as prime minister, a lady. Before, during Trump, it was more of a populist uprising is what they were calling it, or nationalistic. And the word nationalistic by the left was being twisted to mean that you were fascist, phobic of different races, homophobic, that kind of thing. That's not what it means. Being, nationalistic just means that you put your own country first. You try to help other countries with what you have, but you're also proud of your own country. Again, Zelensky's proud of his country. I don't understand why Americans on the left think that's exclusively Ukrainian or exclusively whatever. So anyway, I grew up, like I told you, as a Marine Corps officer's kid. He was a pilot. And I understand what, sacrifice is for your country. My dad was a Vietnam vet, shot down in Vietnam in a coma for 6 weeks. So I think that's another problem with the way people are viewing Ukraine. They're throwing around the word nuclear like it was nothing. Where we are slowly leading up to, and I've gone off on a different path here, Christian, but with this Ukraine thing, we are slowly leading up to American boots on the ground. I am simply not willing to do that. But that's where we're leading up to. And I know that the administration has said that they wouldn't do that, but he also said he wouldn't send the long-range capability missiles that you were talking about earlier. He also said he wouldn't send these tanks. So just give it some more time. We've got to have cooler heads prevail on this issue. Yeah, because it's just escalating out of control. And I went off on a tangent, so sorry. Where were we? I think that was good. It is interesting. I think the 2020 global pandemic, I think a lot of what people experienced then was, like you said, pushing some folks to the wall. And I think a lot of people woke up to what was happening. And it did help people kind of realize that they're going to give themselves permission to speak out against things that may seem unpopular. It might be their entryway into a more right of center way of thinking. So I think that might have had a contributing effect. Yeah. I think you're exactly right, because, I'm older than you are, and I could not have imagined ever, vaccine mandates in our country and people being kicked out of jobs, good people that we needed in our military and in our, in our other public services, being kicked out of jobs all over the place. Countries like Australia locking people down in these vaccine, you won't get a vaccine or COVID camps. I mean, that's what China does. China locks Uyghur Muslims up in camps. Yeah. It's been kind of mind-blowing over the past few years. And I think you're right. It has forced maybe that creeping Marxism to come to the forefront, where you really see what the government is capable of doing. And it has really made people with sane minds a little bit afraid. So I always say, I came to DC. I was working in international development. That's what I used to do. I traveled around the world helping other countries develop economically. I wasn't planning on getting into this type of policy. I worked in policy, but I wasn't planning on getting into this. But they really scared me. The liberal left has really scared me, because they really are trying to take away our freedoms. And this whole narrative that they have of being inclusive and equitable and all this stuff, it's only inclusive if you believe like they believe. Yeah. So that's not America. That's not how I grew up. That's not what my dad fought in war for. It's not what my grandfathers fought for. It's not right. We've all got to stand up and say no. And I think even on the social issues, which I think a lot of Americans are so much more squeamish about pushing back against the leftist paradigm or the talking points, I think we're seeing a lot of pushback against the left on that front too. I mean, the trans issues and school being pushed in schools and on kindergartners, there seems to be
growing pushback against the sort of drag queen library hour type situations. It's people have given themselves permission to be outspoken about it. In Virginia here in my state where I live right now, a couple of years ago there was a big parents movement, which I think helped elect a Republican governor for the first time in a while. It was in response to some of these social issues in schools. That's also a part of it.
Well, Christian, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there, because I had somebody ask me like a year ago, what are the Republicans doing about the transgender issue? And I'm like, the Republicans aren't doing, I'm not going to cuss on your show here, but they're not doing
Feel free.
It's the parents
that
are doing something about the transgender issue. It's like they rose up in like a militant force, like, no, you're not doing this to our kids. And we've seen it in Florida as well. You're right. I live outside of DC and in Virginia as well. And so that's hope to me. That's encouragement. And that's how it should be, because this government is not run by the Biden administration. Ultimately, it's run by the people. And I had somebody on Twitter, I tweeted something and I forget, but they came back and said, oh yeah, well, who is monitoring the Biden administration? Because the Biden administration wanted to monitor citizens and something else. I can't remember what the issue was. And I was like, we're supposed to be monitoring them. It's us. They're put there by us. We have to stop letting all this stuff happen. And so that's what I'm trying to do with Counterpoint Institute, Christian, to go back to your original question of why I'm doing this, because I go and find out what the truth is. And I hope I've given a lot of truth today. And we can talk about the border if you want to as well. A lot of people don't know about that. But then I go to Capitol Hill and I try to change public policy because of it, legislation because of it. So people say, what can I do? And I know this sounds like, oh, yeah, right. Everybody says this. You can call your congressman and you can pressure them into whatever it is that you don't like what they're not doing. A lot of them are not voting against things that they should. They're not doing the right things. Some are. We have some great people. If they are, support them in some way. Support organizations, nonprofits like mine, where we are really trying to change the trajectory of the nation. I mean, this is a great nation. I don't want to lose it.
Yeah. I think it's up to individual citizens, these citizen leaders, to rise up. Like you said, it doesn't seem like the Republican Party is taking the leadership role in Congress to push back against Drag Queen Story Hour or whatever. But it's not like these sacred cows of the left are indestructible. I mean, Roe v. Wade. Can you imagine? Who did you expect to see that revoked in your lifetime?
No, all my life it's been a thing. So no, I didn't. And I a few years ago had actually read in depth about the legal case, and I was like, this actually, I'm not a lawyer, but from understanding from a policy position, I was like, this really doesn't stand up in a court of law. I really don't understand how this was passed. And so the Supreme Court, reviewed it and said the same thing. It's actually, people kept, even our own administration, coming out and saying, they've overturned a constitutional right. Well, the point was, it wasn't a constitutional right. It was a landmark case decision that they had made in 72 or 71 or something. But it was not a constitutional right. That's why it was overturned. On the other hand, a right to life is the constitutional right. So, yeah, you're right. I mean, and the point you're kind of making is that there is hope.
Yeah, you can topple these idols. You can topple them over. I mean, even the expected backlash, the 2020 election, it wasn't a smashing victory for the right, but it's not like the feminists or the leftists mobilized all these people who were so outraged that they took away the right to abortion that it was a blue tide. I mean, that should give encouragement to anybody who feels a little black-pilled or demoralized about the state of America. If you don't like how things are going right now, you can take individual steps on your own to change it.
Well, that's right. And, I try to, when I do TV or podcasts or something, I do try to tell about what's really going on, because people need to know, and they're not being told by the media. At least not the mainstream media.
Sure.
And in spite of that, it is bad. There's really, I feel like I'm in the twilight zone right now with the Biden administration. They're doing stuff that I would never have imagined. But if I thought there was no hope for this great country, I would not be doing what I'm doing. I can tell you, it's a lot. It's hard. It's a lot of work, emotionally and physically. It's a lot of work. There is hope, because this nation is made out of American citizens. You go around the country and the majority of people still believe in the principles that this nation was founded on. And the only problem that I see sometimes is that there is complacency. Yeah. Or if it's not complacency, it says just that people don't know what to do. So what I suggest is call your congressman. You know what? Get on the school board, get on the city council, do something to change your community, or at least to speak, because it doesn't happen overnight. Change doesn't happen overnight, but speak your mind. Mm-hmm. Do you know about that Coach Flynn? Do you know about Coach Flynn? The guy that stood up.
Was this about prayer, a football team in prayer?
No, that's a different coach. Okay. But this guy, he was actually a teacher, I think a substitute teacher a few years ago. He stood up and said, his daughter's curriculum was all this stuff, kind of what we were talking about, America hates Black people and American civilization is terrible, blah, blah, blah. And he just went to him and was like, why are you teaching this stuff? This isn't good. He was very nice about it. Mm-hmm. Anyway, he ended up getting fired. But Judicial Watch, took over his case, and he has now been able to speak his mind. He's done very well, and it's changed the trajectory of his community. And he was just, I listened to him speak a few weeks ago. In his own mind, just a teacher, just a dad, just a parent. But he's an American citizen that stood up to talk about what's right and wrong. And we got to do that. And, people are afraid of being called haters or whatever. Yeah. We got to get past all that. We got to talk to each other.
Right.
So
people are afraid of that dark night before the dawn, before Judicial Watch took over his case where he was fired. They don't want to be that person who's fired or ostracized by the other parents. No, of course not.
Right. I agree.
Do you think it takes like a certain type of person to kind of push against that tide, or would you advise that everybody should give it a try?
I think it takes an American.
That's a good answer.
I'm being a little silly, but I'm also being truthful.
Yeah.
Because it was a group of guys that got together and said, we got to declare independence from this, regime that's telling us what to do and taking all our tax dollars, and we don't have a say in what's going on. Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, back then, the people that fought against that to make the nation that we are, they didn't know what was going to happen. They could have been hung. They could have been hung as people who betrayed their country. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's, at least now, what we have to worry about. But I just think Americans have backbone. What's really funny is recently my husband and I were reached out to by, that doesn't make grammatical sense, but an organization overseas in the UK reached out to us to ask us for some training help and just help with the direction they were going. And we were like, well, we're glad to help you, but why? And basically what they said was, because Americans just have know-how. They know how to get it done. And we just kind of laughed. And the more that I have dealt over the years with different countries, I realize we do have a special thing where we're like, no, we're getting this done. This is the way it's going to be. It's going to be hard, maybe, but we're going to get it done. And I think Hungary actually is an example of that, in the EU as well. They very cheerfully stand up to the EU and say, no, we have national sovereignty, or no, we believe in family.
Yeah.
So it's not hard, but you know what? Nothing in life that's really worth it is easy, or at least not a lot of things are. So I think that everybody can do their small part.
I want to shift gears and go back to the border, our southern border. I know you're an expert on this. You visited the border several times in the past few years. I remember I was following your commentary 2 years ago very closely about how the Mexican cartels, they set up monopolies at the border to control the flow of human trafficking. Yeah, I'll let you tell this story, but you were really the only person I saw who was discussing this. But explain the kind of the staggering cruelty, but also the economics, the big business of illegal border crossings, and how the Biden administration kind of aggravates it. Can you tell this story?
Yeah. Oh yeah, the Biden administration is subsidizing the Mexican cartels. You're right. This part of the story is hardly ever told. I honest to God don't know why some of the big news media don't pick up this story. You know, some of the articles I wrote, but nobody gets across the Mexican border into the United States unless the cartels authorize it and are paid for it. And I have, as you know, talked with federal and local law enforcement down there, like, you know, many people, ranchers, business owners down there. One Border Patrol agent that's retired told me, you know, again, you hear this all the time. I said, well, why can't they just freelance across? And he said, because they'll be killed. And he described to me how they have what's the word? Lookouts in all sections around the border. And if they see people trying to come and cross the border by themselves, they'll kill them, they'll give them a warning, they'll rape them, they'll shoot them, whatever it is. It's a really bad thing. And one of the worst stories probably that he told me is that there were a group of people coming across and they were carrying drugs. So maybe they were only trying to ferry drugs across. I'm not sure if they were going to stay or not. But the cartels apprehended them. They were coming on their own as freelancers, and they killed them and they left their bodies there. And the really creepy thing was, besides the fact that they killed them, was that they didn't take the drugs. They were making, and I asked this guy, his name is Dan Cantu. I asked him, well, why? And he said, well, they're making a point that we will kill you if you try this. We don't even care about the drugs in this instance. We will kill you if you do not cooperate with us coming across the border. They left a little sign on their chests that said, for being a grasshopper in Spanish, because you know, trying to come across the border, that's what they're called, grasshoppers. So anyway, that happens a lot. It is a very cruel situation at the border. And the Biden administration has put out this narrative of humane, orderly, and safe illegal immigration. It is not. So I've gone down there. I don't know, Christian, if you've seen some of the videos that I've taken of the stash houses, or they're called drop houses.
No, tell me about it. People
are trafficked. They're left, they cross over into our border. The Mexican cartels put them in these houses, and they're, you know, a lot of them they're just structures. They're horrible places. There's different ones. I've seen broken down houses where people are just crammed into. I've seen some without doors and windows. People are crammed into them. But in the words of many of the law enforcement officers down there, you know, the women are raped, people are exploited. A lot of times people are kept there longer, while the coyotes exploit more money in order to release them.
This is on the Mexican side?
Here here's the thing, it's on our side.
Okay.
They crossed the border and put them in these drop houses right along our border on the US side. And this is where these coyotes are operating. And I've seen them in Arizona. I've seen them in Texas. They're all over the place. But there are places of operation where the immigrants are supposed to be trafficked into the interior, to I-10 or wherever it is. And it has just made such a huge impression on me. I was talking to a sheriff whose town is not even on the border. It's about 30 miles in the border. And his duty was to go and pick up dead bodies of illegal immigrants that weren't making it through the desert. And he was very honest about it. He said, I'm tired of picking up dead bodies. That's not reported. A few months ago, I found out, the Biden administration wasn't even allowing the CBP to report any longer the number of illegal immigrants that were dying crossing our borders. And that's through dehydration, it's through the neglect of the Mexican cartels. It's all kinds of, sometimes, like I heard the story, another police officer, local officer told me he went to pick up two people, and before he got there, one had been raped and murdered, one had been shot by the cartels. Because once they get them over, they don't care. Yeah. They have the money, that's what they're supposed to do. They leave them in the desert to die. I don't know if you've seen the pictures of immigrants stuffed in these hot crates that are nailed together. I could go on and on and on. It's an extremely inhumane way of allowing immigration into our country. You cannot come without the help of the Mexican cartels and these coyotes that are bringing people across. In the words of a Border Patrol agent, they have no regard for human life. They don't care. So I'll pause there for a minute and see if you have any questions, because I could go on and on about it. It's brutally inhumane. The Mexican cartels are brutally inhumane.
Yeah. And just this constant flow of illegal immigration coming from the southern border. It's from Central and Southern America. Not always, because there are some other country, like individuals from other countries who are coming in.
Middle East. They're getting in from the Middle East as well. They're
doing it through the cartels, obviously.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a net, we don't know who is coming in. So that's one reason why people like Trump want to control the southern border. It's kind of a national security no-brainer. The alleged the nominal reason why I suppose that the Biden administration is so adamantly opposed to what the Trump administration was doing in terms of securing the border, I suppose, is because border security, it's racist, or these people just want a better opportunity in the land of freedom. What do you think are the real motivations of having such a porous border?
Well, when I first heard people saying this, I thought, do you really think that's true?
Yeah.
But the more time has gone on, the more I think it's because they will change the demographics of the country at any cost in order to elect Democrats. And, some people are hearing this probably think, oh man, you're a conspiracy theorist type, whatever. And I had that feeling at first too, but I can't see any other reason for it, because it is destroying our country. It will have long-term destructive effects on our country. These effects are not at the border. They're in Wisconsin. They're in Ohio. They're moving all over the United States. And I'm not talking about illegal immigrants that come here looking for a better life. I believe in immigration. It should be orderly. It should be safe. It is not. Illegal immigration is not. It is not. And, we haven't talked about this, but it taxes our country in so many ways. And let me divert for a second, Christian, and then remind me what you asked me, because this is really important. I talked to a senior Border Patrol official in Texas, and he had told me that there was a rise in the number of domestic violence cases among Border Patrol agents, DUIs, suicides, many different things, because they're very discouraged. They're overwhelmed. 80% of Border Patrol are babysitting illegal immigrants, and they're not patrolling the border. That's why we have seen our U.S. air marshals called down to the border, DHS agents, all kinds of people going down to the border to babysit, not to secure the border, to babysit. But they're also overwhelmed by the things that I told you, picking up dead bodies, dealing with women who are raped by the cartel. Horrible stuff. Not a good situation. One Border Patrol, I think it may have been the same one Border Patrol agent, no, actually it was local law enforcement, because they've been called also to deal with all of this. Police officer, a male, was telling me that, he would be on the way to picking up maybe, a family or somebody who had crossed over that was walking through the desert. This was in Texas. And he was trying to get to them because they'd been walking for hours. They were, on their last leg, trying to get to them, to help them, to bring them food, put them in the air conditioning, whatever. And he'd get another call about another family. And he said, I know this sounds bad, or not necessarily family, just people. He said, but that second call, I can't go to it. And I call them the walking dead, because I know by the time I'm able to get back to them, some of them are going to be dead. So it's a really horrible situation. Fentanyl is coming across our border at an unprecedented amount. The Mexican cartels have a business set up on their side where they are mixing fentanyl in with other drugs. So that's a large part of the problem, is that people don't know in America, a lot of young people don't know they're even getting fentanyl, and it takes a very minute amount of fentanyl to kill somebody. So we're seeing record numbers of fentanyl come in. We have record deaths in the United States from fentanyl and fentanyl-related type drugs. Again, I feel like I'm in the twilight zone sometime on why the Biden administration thinks that this kind of stuff is not going to destroy our country. Because if it's not stopped, it will. It's just a really bad situation, so let me make this point, because I try to make this point. So if anybody's listening, I'm talking about fake drugs being laced with fentanyl, like even Xanax, things that maybe your friend might, say, oh, are you feeling stressed? Well, here, take this. She might not tell you, or he might not tell you, I got this off the internet, or I bought this from the so-and-so. Oh, but it's a prescription type drug. Didn't get it by a prescription, but it's a normal drug. These things are being laced with fentanyl, and people are dying because they don't even know they're taking it. And fentanyl is the #1 killer of young people ages 18 to 45 in America right now. #1 killer. And I want to attribute that to Families Against Fentanyl, because they did the research on that, using CDC statistics to figure that out. So, that's an organization that deals with the families of all the people that have been killed by fentanyl. So we have record number deaths. I just, not just of the illegal immigrants crossing over, but also of Americans taking these drugs from fentanyl. Your original question, but he's trying, it's like he's destroying this country.
Where are the cartels getting the fentanyl? Are they manufacturing these drugs themselves?
Well, a lot of it's coming in from China.
So they have the Mexican cartels, these mob gangster organizations or illegal organizations, have contracts with manufacturers in China, and these Chinese organizations, are they also illegal within China, or are they associated with the Chinese government?
Christian, I don't know. That's actually a very good question. That's a question actually we could ask either my husband, because he's an expert on the border, or do you know Derek Maltz?
No,
He's a former DEA agent. You should follow him on Twitter. You should follow him all
Derek
the
Maltz.
time. But he is an expert on the drug situation, and also has a heart for all the families that have lost all these kids. So I would recommend actually having him on your show. He's awesome.
I'd love to. Yeah.
But I do not know, I don't know the full process behind that. I
Yeah.
know the process over here where the Mexican cartels have labs on the other side of the border in Mexico,
Yeah.
where they're mixing this and it gets through to our border through the coyotes, goes up to Wisconsin, to Ohio, where they're seeing, like, one example is these pills, they're candy coated pills that kids are attracted to. And they seized like record number of that at one of the borders that I've been down to in Arizona. So you see how insidious it is, though, that they're making them even these bright candy coated pills that kids are like attracted to. So anyway.
Yeah. So having a porous border, it's allowing the flow of this poison that's coming into our country and ruining the lives of so many Americans in Wisconsin and wherever, Kentucky. And like you said, it's changing voting demographics. If illegal immigrants in the country were voting Republican, then I'm sure the Democrats would be building that wall in a second. It's and it is funny because if you were to admit that out loud, the slur you get is oh, you're peddling the great replacement theory, this idea that the left is trying to change the native population, replace it with individuals from outside the country, normally the third world. I know in France that's actually quite a mainstream political issue. There is concern there, but here you can get raked over the coals for even suggesting that. But it seems, I mean, what is the term for these cities? Safe haven cities or
sanctuary cities?
Sanctuary cities, right? So there are mechanisms in place for illegal immigrants to vote, which is why voter integrity seems to go hand in hand with border security. But yeah, it just seems so obviously not in the best interest of any country to allow these policies, and I don't understand how it's so mainstream to do this.
I like I said, I just continue to feel like I'm in the twilight zone. The Biden administration was able to use loopholes in border policy in order to make this happen. Trump had put in the migrant protection protocols or the remain in Mexico policy. It was really helping because people could come and claim asylum, but they had to wait in Mexico while their claim was being processed. So we weren't overrun with people just flooding in, or our law enforcement was able to handle the process of it. It's really, really simple. This is a country of immigration. My great grandparents on both sides, immigrants. Probably you as well. We are a melting pot. We are different from most countries, even in Europe. We are of all ethnicities, but we're talking about illegal immigration. It's as simple as you're in your home, you go to bed at night, you leave all the doors and windows open so people can come in, right? Is that what you do?
No.
I don't know anybody listening that does that. You have to know who you're inviting into your house. I believe very much, like I said, in immigration. So we should know who's coming into our house. We should not tax our cities, our schools, our organizations unduly, which is what we're doing right now with this. On the other hand, like we talked about, which is very rarely talked about, and man, do I wish that it was more widespread, we are creating inhumane situations for illegal immigrants that I don't think they know what they're getting into, quite frankly. It's a very bad situation for them. So, even I always say to somebody who thinks this mass immigration is great, Well, if you think we should have more immigration, figure out a way to do it legally then, because it's really hurting these people. It's not the safe and humane thing that you think it is. I was in Arizona at a border town, and I was talking to a business owner there who had had her business broken into by some of the human traffickers, actually, that had been put in jail and released. This was early on in the Biden administration. And, they're not prosecuting the human traffickers either, not even the US citizens that were trafficking people from the border into the interior. They're just being released from jail. And so 2 of them broke into her shop and stole a lot of stuff. Anyway, her big issue was like, she was brokenhearted for the illegal immigrants because she was seeing them sleep on park benches all over her city and having to break in to steal to get food. Because in her words, they come here thinking that Biden is telling them that they're going to have a house and they're going to have food and they're going to have all this. And then they get here and a lot of them are, without anything, like I said, sleeping in parks. It's just a very bad situation all over. But I have seen some great American nonprofits step up and try to help the people that are here. Americans seem to have a heart, even when it's hurting us, we continue to try to help people because we are humane. We are a humanitarian country. I just would like for us to do immigration legally.
Yeah. Heartbreaking situation. And props to that person who, even though they were wronged by the situation, still had the greatness of heart to have empathy for these people who have been horribly deceived and let down by the Biden administration, luring them in and exposing them to rape and death by dehydration and I want to start winding down. I do have like one last question for you because I think what you're doing and what you set out to do on your own is so vitally important and interesting. So how would you advise somebody who, perhaps a young person, a recent grad who's interested in these issues, how would you advise them to go about building a similar career in foreign policy and national security? And if the mainstream avenues for them to do that are to if it's not pinpointing the location of where there's most significance, like you said at the beginning, like how can they do this perhaps independently on their own or some other way?
You mean the last part of it, you faded out a little bit. I know you said, how does somebody maybe formulate a career in the foreign policy field? And then you said, what does someone do who wants to make a difference?
Yeah, who wants to make a difference? But like, I was struck by the fact that at the beginning of this interview, when you said why you founded the Counterpoint Institute, you realized you had to set out on your own because you had an idea of how to pinpoint what the real issues were. And the organizations you were working with presumably weren't doing as good a job at like addressing the real issue as well as you could have done it on your own. So if there's no establishment, if there's no formal institution aside from Counterpoint Institute to help young people try to affect legislation in an efficient and effective way, then what is your advice for them?
Well, as far as getting into this field, I would say study where your heart is, first of all. And if you're going to work in DC, it's good to have at least a master's degree a lot of times because it's a competitive area. But study where your heart is. I was actually fortunate enough for my master's and PhD to fall into international development because when I was accepted, I went to Tulane University. I was accepted by Tulane to study international development, and I had tried to study international affairs somewhere else, I think in DC. And I thought, oh, well, okay, maybe I'll do this. This will work out. And then I realized I loved it because it for me put together economics and humanitarian aid because international development has to do with disaster help, but it also has to do with economic development, social development, hospitals, health, public health. It's all of these things. I went the economic route, but I got to travel all over Africa during school and after school, and the Middle East, and helping people strengthen their businesses, businesses so really small to really large, like in Western Africa, helping these women who were mixing iodine and salt to sell because it would give them income, but it would also help the children there where they wouldn't have diarrhea and all these other health problems, to later on in my career helping women with bigger companies that had employees and things like that. And it was really my heart. I really enjoyed it. And I also developed I had dealings. I began working in policy in that area as well. So I loved it. And then when I came to DC, kind of segued into what I'm doing now. So first of all, study something that you love, and then, come to DC, perhaps. As far as like what I have found is really important, I didn't have the chance to do this, but I think if you're just out of graduate school or out of college, or even a little older, intern somewhere, even if it's volunteer. I was actually just helping my girlfriend's daughter with that today. I have observed, because I've had interns in different jobs where I've worked, that the interns that come here and get experience in DC, in the DC area, what happens is you get all these network connections, whether that's where you want to stay or not. You build know-how, you build connections, and I have just seen people take off in their careers right after that. So I would highly recommend doing that. And what else did you ask, Christian? You asked something a little bit side tangent of that.
Yeah, I suppose the side tangent is, well, you're talking about building a career by perhaps working for someone else, some other established organization. Would you recommend that a young person eventually set out to do what you did, which is break away, establish your own institution? And if you do think that that's a good idea for some people, how should they go about kind of crafting that career path?
I see. Okay. Well, I certainly would never tell anybody not to do it. You gotta get your experience first. I worked for I worked for 2 nonprofits in DC. So I learned how it ran. I have done, I'm a policy person now, but I've done program management. I've done budgeting. I've done grant management. I've done all business development. I know how to do all those things. So I got a lot of experience and built my own network in DC. So first I would say, do that, intern so you can get your way into a good organization. Whether that's here in DC or it's in your own state's capital or local community. And then if your heart leads you that way, I'm a Christian and I believe that the Lord was leading me to that. And that was through many years of prayer, actually. So I didn't just come up with it. But if you feel led to do that, yeah. But the first thing that you need to do is to do the legal process, which is to become a 501c3, a nonprofit organization. And that's what I am. So people who give to Counterpoint Institute, it's tax deductible. So get your experience and then, do it step by step if that's what you have to do. But you have to have people that want to support your vision. And that's what I have been blessed with, and I continue to look for, because I believe what we're trying to do at Counterpoint Institute and changing the world, really, I believe a lot of people share that vision, but maybe they don't know organizations like mine that are doing it. So share the vision, donate. $5 or $5,000, whatever you can do.
Yep.
But also get on social media and promote what the organization's doing. I mean, what you're doing today by doing this podcast with me is a great support. It's a great way of helping me complete my mission and my vision, and I really appreciate that. So there's a lot of different ways to do it. Does that kind of answer the question?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's great advice.
Be creative.
Be creative. Yeah. And perhaps I'd add to that, try to find some mentors in DC,
Yeah.
your state capital, your state or your local community.
Yes.
Because to quote Don Rumsfeld, you don't know what you don't know, or there are known unknowns. You don't even, if you're a recent grad, the path forward, you can't even see that far. You can't even see perhaps more than 3 steps ahead. So it's very valuable. It's invaluable to have somebody who's lived in DC perhaps a few decades, who's seen the in and outs of different administrations coming into town, or who understand how NGOs work with the government.
And like I said, I've only been here almost 7 years.
Yeah.
So I have a different background, but it's really helped me because I've traveled all around the world and I know exactly how our foreign policy is affecting different countries. So I feel that I'm really blessed, even though, I didn't get out of school immediately and work for Congressman XYZ like a lot of people have, which is awesome to be able to do. But I have my own mentors here who have been in DC for a couple of decades, and they know everybody and they know strategy and they understand, what you just said. They've been here for, 5 or 6 administrations. Mm-hmm. So, which kind of leads me to what I said earlier about networking. I'm telling you, I really believe being an intern, whether you're doing it on your own dime for a little while or not, and getting connected, networking in DC or in your state's capital, I believe is very important, because then people get to know you, they get to trust you. I will admit to you that when I first got here, international development is generally, it's probably 99% liberal left.
Yeah.
And there I was, but I was working on issues to help countries develop. And particularly, I was helping women and women's businesses. Mm-hmm. So I didn't really care what your politics were. We were working on things together. But when I started getting into the conservative movement, I will admit that I had some people whose names you would recognize, when I would talk to them, or people would bring me to them to meet them. They were a little skeptical, like it took a while for them to learn that they could trust me and that I was
because of your experience in the development world.
Okay. Because most people are liberal left, and then you work, you come with this hairdo and you're in a liberal left business field. And so anyway, but networking is really important. Reach out to people, talk to people, find out what you don't know, like you said.
Yeah. Dr. Shea, I think we could speak for hours more, but maybe we should save it for a different show in the future.
Let's come up with some other topics and we'll do it again, Christian.
Thank you so much for speaking with me. This was fantastic.
You're very welcome. This is extremely enjoyable.
Oh, excellent. I'm so glad to hear that. And for everyone listening at home, if you like this video, like and subscribe. And we stay tuned for more interviews in the future. All right. Thank you, everyone. Take care.